Thank you for joining me on Connections today. The government have said that they are treating all IDPs, including the not Muslims, equally. But you are amongst those who are now calling for a specific policy when dealing with issues related to the not Muslims. So why do you think there should be such a distinction when dealing with issues relating to displacement?
Well, if the government is in fact treating all people equally, I think that's a really good thing, and I think we should commend that. Now, the reason that I have asked for a specific policy, Shifan, is that the experience of being expelled and being outside of the north for 20 years is different from being away from your homes for, say, a year or two, right? And there needed to be a recognition of that. That the kind of assistance that you would need, the kind of infrastructure support that the places from which people were expelled would need, those are different issues, right? So therefore, I mean, that was the reason that we called for a sort of a specific policy addressing maybe not just the northern Muslims, but long-term displacement as opposed to a more short-term displacement event. I mean, it's not to say that short-term displacement, all short-term displacements are the same either, right? I mean, there are places where infrastructure was completely bombed out, and so then that would need specific kinds of assistance. But I think the call is basically to understand that maybe all displacement experiences are not the same. Right? And also, the expulsion of the northern Muslims was a specific historical event. People were not able to go back because of the presence of the LTTE, so they couldn't look after their property. There were issues like that, right? So those kinds of things have to be taken into account. Okay, like for instance, if there were land transactions that were happening, land claims, land disputes that happened when Muslims were not there, right? There should be measures to understand those things and measures to see that, the same kinds of laws that apply if you were around wouldn't apply if you were not there, right? So to recognize the specificity of those experiences, that is why we were calling for a specific policy.
The Citizens Commission, you have been the architect behind this, and the report, of course, was published in November last year. So it made several recommendations to civil society, the Muslim political leadership, and so on. What would be the main areas you all have been looking at and wanting to push at this moment in post-war Sri Lanka?
Well, I think we should think of the situation now as, progressed beyond sort of the immediate return phase, right? So people are returning. It's slow, but people are returning. People are establishing their lives in the north, right? Livelihoods are starting and all of that, right? But now there are a lot of issues about, certain sort of resource-based conflicts between communities, and that's a really sad thing. Okay, that is one element. The other element also is that there is a way in which northern Muslim return and assistance to one-year IDPs are seen as two kind of competing areas to which resources need to be allocated, right? So now these are all really disturbing, distressing developments. Okay, and then there are also issues like, for instance, the presence of civil society leadership within these returning communities is minimal, right? There's a real big dependence on, the political actors, right? And that is not necessarily a good thing, because the political actors have their own limitations, right? And maybe civil society can do things that political actors cannot, right? Especially in terms of mediating disputes and things like that, right? So I mean, that would be a direction in which we would like, thinking and action to go in.
Mm-hmm. What has been implemented so far? Now, there were lots of recommendations. What has been the response so far from the government?
One thing is the recognition that this year would be the year during which long-term IDP issues will be solved.
Has that happened?
Well, the government has said that this is their policy priority. Okay, they said that this in January, and a few things are happening, right? I mean, people are going back to Mana, and there is infrastructure development in the Muslim area, like I said, so we appreciate that. There is some work being done of Talemana Pier, right? So we appreciate that. Don't know to what extent it will get finished anytime soon. Don't know. People are waiting for that. People are anticipating housing, right? So those kinds of assistance. So a few things are happening. I mean, there hasn't been as much recognition, as much appreciation as we would have liked. But it's also been a civil society initiative. It wasn't a government initiative. So I suppose it's all right. But then the LLRC report for instance, recognizes the commission, right? So that we appreciate a lot, and that was really important for the Muslim community, because that was the first time that a state-sponsored commission process recognized a lot of grievances of Muslims, not just the Northern Muslim expulsion, but the Muslims under the CFA, issues in the Eastern Province. All of these were recognized, right? So we see that also as a really important benchmark, right, of state recognition for problems faced by the Muslims. And if you talk to many of the administrators in the northern area, especially in the MENA district, the response has been really favorable, right? There is a recognition that Muslims are coming back, that there are assistance that is necessary, and all of that. I mean, it's not that there are no issues, okay? And this is why it's very important that the specificity is recognized, right? Because issues such as, for instance, people are coming from Puntland, but they're not really settling, right? Half the family is in MENA and half the family is back in Puntland. Right? Now, this is a specificity of the Muslim experience, right? I mean, they were driven out, they lived outside for 20 years, and I mean, they're not going to just like drop everything and come back, right? They really want to return, but they want to establish themselves solely in the north. They want to see that there is enough infrastructure, that there is enough schooling and facilities for their children to come. I mean, the sort of the immediacy of the displacement experience, right, where you cut all ties and where you have no access to services and where you have to start from scratch with regards to education and everything. They just don't want to do that again. They don't want to be displaced again. Right? That experience of being displaced, even though they are returning, they don't want to experience that again.
Right. Right. So let's go to the displacement in general, the Manic Farm, as you mentioned, and all that. Before that, I'd like to ask you now, the issues of the Muslims, are we to look at the issues as Muslim IDPs, Tamil IDPs, and so on? Should there be differentiation? Should that be happening, or should be? Now, the Muslim Commission, of course, looked at issues of the Muslims alone, but is there anybody else looking out for IDPs in general? Is there any mechanism in place?
Okay, excellent question, right? And this is what we've been thinking about a lot recently, because I think, as you said, the commission looked at the issue of the Northern Muslim expulsion, right? And I think it was necessary because, as we stated at the outset with the commission, the expulsion hasn't been integrated sufficiently into the historical narrative of the conflict, right? When we study the conflict, the place that is given to the expulsion has been insufficient, and we hope that this intervention, a comprehensive report, will address that. Right? But having said that, now I think the issues of return to the north have to be seen as an issue of the north, okay? Not necessarily a Muslim issue or a Tamil issue. And I think that is really the problem now, okay? That we are not seeing it like that. And I think it's the fault of Tamil leadership and civil society, as well as Muslim leadership and civil society, okay? And there is a sort of a ghettoization of issues, right? Tamil issues are these and the Muslim issues are these. And I don't think we can move forward if we don't look at it holistically as an issue for the region. Okay, and you're right, and I think the government is in a rush to complete the resettlement process. Right, there aren't enough conditions in place for many of the people who are returning from Manic Farm, right, and they are having really bad experiences of returning to places where there is nothing. Right? I mean, these are all fundamental issues, right? And some of the sort of the conflicts that the Muslims are facing from sort of the local Tamil leadership and the local sort of administration is precisely this, right? People are seeing that there are Tamils who are returning with nothing, maybe really traumatized with loss of family members, people having disappeared from their families, those kinds of experiences, right? And then you see these Muslims looking quite comfortable, right? They are actually quite comfortable in Puntland, but still want to return to the north, and they feel a real kind of like disconnect between these two experiences, right? And I think there is, in terms of experience, that there is a disconnect, right? But this doesn't mean that the Muslims are not going to come back, okay? And it doesn't mean that the Tamils don't have the right to return and to assistance, okay? We have to have a framework that can take both of these things into consideration. Right? Not as competing, not as somehow sort of disturbing the narrative of Muslim return, the Tamil issue disturbing the narrative of Muslim return, or the Muslim issue disturbing the narrative of Tamil suffering. Right? We have to have sort of a broad enough perspective that takes both of these as the reality of the north into account. Okay? And it's after that that we can think about how do we go forward. Right? So there needs to be, some of the sort of hopeful signs in MENA are that the Muslims are returning and they are staying, and they are, some are going back, but the majority are not going back, and they are staying, and so communities are building up, and there are linkages that are forming at the community level. Right? So this is great. Now, for instance, there was a when we went recently to MENA, there was an issue in Karisal, and it was being sorted out by community groups, right? A church assisted group and you know, a Maulavi. They were getting together and they were sorting it out amicably, right? So those kinds of things are happening, right? And that is a good sign. So, you know, so I think it's really essential that we now start thinking about it as an issue of the North.
Now, you earlier said that we need a framework to address all these issues. So, can you talk about this framework? What would you like to see happening?
Well, from the Tamil leadership, right, there has to be a recognition of the expulsion, right? There has to be a recognition of the expulsion, and there has to be a sort of an encouragement for Muslims to return at a minimum, right? And this hasn't been done. That would be great. At the same time, I mean, I think from the Muslim leadership, there has to be a recognition that, you know, Muslims are returning to a place that has had a devastating conflict at the very minimum, right? And, you know, and the government, there has to be, at the level of the government, there has to be a recognition, right? This has been a devastating conflict that has affected the people, you know, and without, and just, I think, you know, concentrating only on infrastructure. I mean, this is not something that new that I'm saying, right? People have been saying this since the end of the conflict in 2009, right? There has to be more sort of acknowledgement of the lives that were lost, right? And the destruction that happened, you know, and the blood that was shed, right? Where is the mourning? Where is the commemoration of that, right? I mean, we have a victory commemoration, right? But where is the commemoration of the loss and the death? Right? I mean, I'm not necessarily only, and this doesn't have to be necessarily only the death of the North. Oh, I mean, you know, there was a huge, large number of, you know, Sinhalese soldiers who died as well. I mean, we need to mourn that, right? Where is the mourning?